Recently in a video we looked at the execution of Eddie Slovic, a member of the US Army who during the Second World War was shot for desertion. Slovic was the only American to have been shot for this crime during the conflict, and his execution was rather troubled. It was believed that Slovic's death was a result of his previous criminal past as a young man, and as a felon, it's believed that the US military high command took steps to use him as a deterrent, as during that time in the war, the fighting was intense and ferocious, and desertion rates were going up. Today we look at a rather different story, and how the only Canadian executed by his own country during the conflict died. Private Harold Pringle's story is one which is rather debatable, and it's interesting to consider whether he deserved to die or not. Harold Pringle, in fact, should probably have not been involved in the war, in the capacity that he was, as he joined up underage. So join us today as we look at the secret execution of Harold Pringle, the Canadian executed during World War II. And remember to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. When Harold Pringle joined up to fight in the Second World War, he was just 16 years old. He willingly signed up for the fight, despite being underage, but was accepted. His father had fought in the First World War, and had a rather illustrious career in the Canadian Army, and no doubt it's believed that Harold wanted to follow on in his father's footsteps. His father had been a marksman, and was proud about his service, and together they tried to sign up for the Second World War, but Harold's father was refused due to his poor eyesight. Despite being only 16, he was a constant thorn in the side of the military. Harold Pringle lied about his age, and despite being known for being courageous in battle, he was known for having a temper and also going AWOL. Pringle would go out on leave when he wanted to and would not return. This made him a constant deserter, and time again he would repeat this sort of behaviour. This was not accepted in the army at the time. However, it was dealt with more leniently than it was in the First World War. In World War I, deserters were shot at dawn, being tied to posts and being shot by a firing squad. This resulted in hundreds of British soldiers and Commonwealth soldiers being executed, and a number of these were very young men. Private Harold Pringle was fined a number of times, and was also placed in a military prison for his desertion, and much of his time disappearing was due to him visiting towns to see women who had become his girlfriend. Pringle was even sent to reformatory camp for a year, but then escaped after serving only 6 months. He was known for just taking off to see these women when he wanted, however it had disastrous consequences for him. Pringle was part of the Hastings and Prince Edward Regiment, which have a rich military history. During the Second World War they were mobilised as soon as the conflict broke out, and they travelled to Britain and then on to France as part of the 2nd British Expeditionary Force. In 1943 they were part of the Sicily landings on the 10th of June 1943, and then landed in September in Italy. It was during their campaigns in Italy that Pringle managed to regroup with his battalion and then saw action. It was noted how when he arrived in Italy for a short while, he did what he was told and had an unblemished service record. However, he linked up in Italy with some British deserters, and together with Pringle, they created a black market outfit who were intent on getting rich and causing chaos within the Italian local economy. Pringle and a friend, John Lucky McGillivary, were part of a group known as the Sailor Gang. These men had all fled their responsibilities and units and ran to Rome to make a healthy amount of money selling black market goods. Inside of Rome, the members of the Sailor Gang were living the high life, whilst they were all in fact criminals who had shirked their military units. They started off well selling black market goods for big profits, but as they got more greedy things went downhill. Their behaviour began to become more debaucherous and raucous, and they were always drunk. They would drink themselves under the table even during the day and would get into fights with locals. The business decisions they made also became more risky and rash, and it resulted in a shocking event that ultimately led to the execution of Harold Pringle. The men were living ultimately as minor gangsters, trying to get rich quick and to evade the Second World War and conflict. During one evening, there had been an argument between two members of the group whilst drinking, and it resulted in the shooting and death of Pringle's friend, Lucky McGillivary. According to the official court proceedings, which took place later, Pringle and the victim Lucky McGillivary were absentees in Rome last autumn and joined a Chicago-type gang. This gang also comprised of absentees from the British Army, the US Army and an absentee petty officer cook from the Royal Navy. On the evening of the 1st of November 1944, one of the houses where the gang lived in Rome, Lucky and Charlie Honess, a British sapper, quarrelled, and Charlie shot Lucky in the abdomen with a revolver. The shot went through his liver. Honess and Pringle then picked up Lucky still alive and put him in a jeep. The accused then drove and were accompanied by other gang members. They went southeast from Rome, and during the journey Lucky said take it easy. After travelling around 14 kilometres, they turned up a lane. Just before, Lucky asked where they were taking him, and the men said they were taking him to a hospital. About 1,600 yards up the lane, Lucky was lifted out of the jeep and placed on the ground. This was about 30 minutes from the time of the first shot. The accused, Harold Pringle, then shot Lucky again, near his heart with a revolver. The Royal Navy petty officer cook, Bill Croft, then after shot 2, borrowed Pringle's revolver and shot Lucky in the forehead. They then put Lucky in an irrigation well, and Pringle threw a branch over him. They then drove back to Rome, where they distributed Lucky's clothing amongst themselves and burned anything of his identifying nature. Lucky's body was found the next morning by some Italians. At trial, Pringle confessed that he'd shot Lucky, and each of the defendants said they did so to obliterate his features to avoid identification. However, Pringle stated that when he had shot Lucky, Lucky was already dead. The courtroom debated this, as if he had died before he was shot by Pringle. This would not have been murder by Pringle. A pathologist who performed the autopsy on Lucky stated how he believed it was a combination of the 3 gunshots that killed him. He said that after the first shot, as no major blood vessel had been hit, Lucky could have lived for up to 10 hours. He also said the combination of the 3 shots would have either killed Lucky instantaneously or within 2 minutes, and that Pringle's shot would have quickened death. The shot Pringle fired was in the left side of the chest and passed through the lung. But interestingly, another pathologist debated that he believed Pringle's shot occurred certainly after death, meaning that Pringle would not have been guilty of murder, and in a sense was firing a bullet into a corpse. He also stated that he believed the 3rd shot was fired into the head after death too, and that shots 2 and 3 were done after the victim's heart stopped beating. The whole debate regarding the trial centred around when Lucky McGillivary had died, and whether Harold Pringle had in fact killed him, or contributed to the murder. It was confirmed by another member of the gang that Lucky was alive when he arrived down the Italian lane, but the whole debate was up to the court-martial and trial to decide. The various members of the gang were placed on trial, but the judges still needed to work out who and when Lucky had been killed. It was clear that they were all complicit and involved in the murder and the dumping of the body. The medical evidence was also rather conflicting, as it was said that one statement says that immediately before shot 2, the victim was alive, another that he was dead, and a third that a pathologist can only surmise on probability or possibility of death. In the case of Harold Pringle, he was sentenced to death by shooting for his involvement in the murder of his friend. It was clear he had shot the man, and he contributed to his death, and it's possible his previous as a deserter had an impact on his sentence. He did appeal, but this was rejected. His prison cell looked out towards Mount Vesuvius, and he was guarded by British sentries. It was noted he was a cheerful prisoner, who even played gin with the guards, and since his court-martial he tried to forget about the death sentence. He was visited by a priest, who spoke to him regularly during his imprisonment, but ultimately it was down to the Canadians, and not the British, to execute him. From the court records we can learn what happened to Pringle during his execution. His execution was performed in strict secrecy, as the Canadian Army did not want it to get out that they had to execute one of their own soldiers who were involved in murder. The court document stated that the place of execution should be secluded and near to the place of confinement, and the best time to do the job was after dawn. Arrangements were made for a firing squad consisting of 1 sergeant and 10 soldiers from the prisoners' unit to be gathered. They were to stand 10 or 12 yards from the prisoner, and then signals would be given before. Pringle was brought to the site of execution, and he was then secured either to a chair or a wooden post. The men selected to shoot Pringle were not happy with their assignment, and they were not happy with the task of shooting one of their own, despite the fact he was involved in desertion and murder. The execution of Harold Pringle was so secret that the exact location is not known. According to the preparations for the execution, he was offered a sedative injection and an alcoholic drink before facing his firing squad. He was then tied to a post or a chair with straps and rope. Pringle was then given a black cap, which was placed over his head, and an aiming mark was placed over his chest for the men to aim at. The officer in charge also carried a loaded revolver in case Pringle needed a coup de grace, and he would have been shot dead within minutes of him arriving at the place of execution. There are confirmation statements in the case file that state Private Harold Joseph Pringle, Hastings and Prince Edward Regiment, was executed by shooting at Avellino, Italy, at 800 hours on the 5th of July 1945. The execution was carried out in the manner mentioned before. A doctor stated how, immediately after the execution of said Private Pringle, I examined his body and found him to be dead. So the execution of Private Harold Pringle is a rather debatable one. It's clear, however, he was involved in shady practices, manipulating the black market in Rome, all whilst he should have been fighting in the Second World War. Interestingly, one of the men who was involved in the murder of Lucky McGillivary was offered immunity to testify against Pringle. The case is rather debatable, and Pringle remains the only Canadian soldier executed by his own soldiers in the Second World War. Once again, thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.